Creatives. This is so true. Creativity can be the difference between feeling just meh about your life versus actually feeling like you are part of that small percent who truly love their life and get a sense of meaning from it. Today we're going to talk about languishing and thriving, and how creativity helps you thrive by experiencing meaning through the act of creativity. We're going to look at how life today compares to the 1970s to understand how and why mental health has changed over time, and focus specifically on what you can control to bring more meaning into your life. Because it's no good pretending that life is perfect. We have to acknowledge the issues with how we live today, but go an extra step and pay dedicated attention to the things that we can improve. Languishing is the middle space between common mental illnesses like depression and anxiety and thriving. It is where a lot of people spend their lives. So if you feel any of these symptoms, you might want to stick around to the end of this video. Low drive, difficulty focusing, reduced sense of meaning, procrastination, and a sense that the days blur together. Creatives. Languishing is a state where most people indicate that they exist in at least one area of life. Typically, this is your job. However, I think many people are so burnt out on their job that they don't really have a good sense of the impact it is having on their personal life. They have accepted that their personal life is a time for tiredness, scrolling, arguing, and preparing for the next day of labour. Languishing feels like you are stuck in a rut, empty, and have no motivation. You aren't necessarily depressed, but you're not feeling all that energised either. Psychologist Corey Keyes introduced the idea that not having a mental illness does not mean you have perfect well-being. There is a difference between mental illness and an amazing life. But there is also a difference between an amazing life and a life that feels sort of meh, where much of the day feels written off, given to a job you can turn your mind off in, go on autopilot, and act a bit like a robot, where you seek pleasure in addictive things like bad food, scrolling, or drugs, where you enter a cycle of switching off during work and switching off in your personal life so you don't recover for the next day in a healthy way. It's really hard to thrive in your well-being when you are tired, addicted, and switched off from the present moment. Psychologist Adam Grant describes languish as a feeling of joylessness, aimlessness, and feeling stuck. And it is something a lot of people first recognised during COVID, possibly because people had more space, more time, and more energy to engage in reflection. Creatives, if you feel like your mental or emotional battery is always at around 20%, you may be experiencing a period of languishing. So, why do people experience languishing? Chronic busyness and burnout are two key components that we commonly see in people who experience languishing. High workload and demands with a low recovery time drive burnout, which is categorized by emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced accomplishment. This is being called work-related syndrome by the World Health Organization because typically people feel this way at work. Creatives, when you find yourself in a state of chronic busyness, what ends up happening is you engage in tasks that make you feel like you are staying afloat rather than finishing tasks that are actually important. When we look at why this happens, it's commonly because people are really tired and don't have the time to reflect about what they are actually trying to achieve, and there is a lot of pressure to perform that keeps attention on a hamster wheel. Creatives, you might have heard of hurry sickness. This is where you end up focusing on things that feel urgent to the detriment of completing things that are important, the things that give you a sense of meaning by making you feel good. A classic example of this is checking emails rather than writing a report. The problem is, finishing that report is the creative task that is important and actually has the capacity to make you feel good, to give you a sense of meaning. It is the perfect bad blend of decision fatigue and appearing busy rather than being able to do things that require focus. To do these tasks that may require something of thinking time that actually looks like procrastination, but is actually you sitting back and accessing the part of your mind that allows you to do your best and most important thinking work. Creatives, Cardiologists Maya Friedman and Ray Rosenman described hurry sickness within type A behaviour. Hurry sickness was described as chronic time urgency and impatience that was linked to stress. The Eisenhower matrix is a good framework, which is on screen, to walk through this concept, as you can see. Importantly, languishing can occur when our days are filled with urgent but unimportant tasks, whereas thriving grows through consistent investment in important activities such as finishing large pieces of work, reflecting, socialising, looking after your physical health, and most importantly, creative practices. Creatives. The reality is the mind is a muscle, and a 30-minute lunch break is not enough for a lot of jobs to actually let your mind rest and recover for the next part of your day. And to make matters worse, now we spend our free time engaging in things that are equally punishing for our brains. If you reflect on how much of your day you spend on urgent versus important tasks, you may be surprised. Now, I acknowledge that not everyone has the control over their workload to focus on important tasks that can make you feel good over the urgent ones, which is why we also have to talk about what happens outside of the workplace in the rest of your life. Creatives. As I said, the mind is a muscle. When people train for a marathon, a big part of the training is rest and recovery. Our brains also need this rest and recovery. During periods of mental rest, the mind is still very active. Reflecting lets you make sense of your reality. It is where you build perspective. You connect what you experience to your values and goals. Without it, we lose clarity of what matters, which can increase reactivity and encourage or reinforce that mindless busyness, hamster wheel-like activities. Creatives. If you look at the average life of a typical middle-aged worker named John in the 1970s, in a Western country, compared to now in the modern world, following the story of Jane, who exists in 2025, you'd be alarmed at how much more free time we all used to have. How much healthier we spent our time and how that environment created the conditions to foster thriving. Let's now tell the stories of John and Jane. John would get to work at 9 a.m. The time between waking up and getting to work would not be work-related. No mobile phones, no laptops, no emails. If you weren't at work, you couldn't do work. During the workday, because of the constraints of technology, work was largely dictated by what a human could do. The workday finished at 5 p.m. and John would be tired, yes, but not completely exhausted. John had the energy and the ability to decide whether he would go socialising with friends, engage in a hobby, or maybe he just had to go home to his family. The point is, his mind was off work. John would get home to his family around 6 p.m. and be entirely in his little family bubble until about 11 o'clock. That's 5 hours of free time. John eats a home-cooked meal with his family, plays a board game, and then him and his partner go into bed. They spend an hour reading, half an hour talking, and then turn the lights off at 9 o'clock to sleep until John wakes again at 7 a.m. Jane wakes up at 6 a.m. so that she can catch up on emails. She also has to check whether her meeting that was scheduled for 10 a.m. was still happening then, or whether it had been moved to 9 a.m. as her colleague said might happen. If it starts at 9 a.m, she has to decide whether she prepares for the meeting or follows up on emails. She checks and the meeting has been moved to 9:30. Now she can do both. She can check emails and prepare for the meeting. Jane gets in the car and calls her boss. She wishes to touch base before the meeting, but her boss wants to talk to her about another meeting that she wants to schedule directly after, to talk about a completely different project. Jane's boss asks her to create a new folder on the system and upload all the required documentation so that the boss can review and think about next steps. Jane says she won't have time because of the back-to-back meetings, and her boss says, yes you can, you'll be at work at 9, that's half an hour. Her boss fails to comprehend the level of mental gymnastics Jane is already doing, and her workday hasn't even technically started yet. Jane doesn't push back on her boss because she's already on the mental hamster wheel and doesn't have the emotional or mental capacity to do that at this time. Jane gets to work and frantically puts a few things together. She zones out during the first meeting, thinking only about the new project she will be talking to her boss about after. After that second meeting, Jane sits at her desk. It's 1 p.m. and she still hasn't eaten breakfast. She is exhausted, but she needs to write down everything from the 2 meetings before she forgets. But she says to herself, let's just take a quick 5-minute break. So Jane goes on her phone and scrolls social media. An hour later, she breaks out of the spell and is completely depleted. She has her lunch, sits back at the desk. By the time she's mentally realised she's at work, it's 4 p.m. She now has an hour to get a day's worth of work done. So she tells herself she would put on a podcast to help her focus. Half an hour later, after checking her notifications, she finally opens a report template for the new project. Then, an email pops up in the corner of her screen, distracting her, and she opens her inbox. She sees an additional 20 emails from the day to respond to, and this new email in particular is requesting a meeting at 9 a.m. tomorrow. So she stays back at work until 6:30 to prepare. When Jane finally gets home, she orders pizza and scrolls on her phone. She tells herself she should exercise, allowing the thought to stay in her mind, making her feel defeated and generate a sense of anxiety and decision fatigue before she finally succumbs to reality. She sits on the couch eating pizza with TV on in the background while scrolling on her phone until about 11:30 at night. She looks over at her to-do list, which includes washing her clothes, organising dinner with friends, and she remembers the 100 books that she's listed on her phone notes app that she wants to read. Jane thinks to herself, I'll start on all that tomorrow. And so the cycle continues. That is the epitome of hurry sickness. Do you feel more like Jane or do you feel more like John? That is an environment conducive to languishing. So what are the differences we see between the modern world and the 1970s? Creatives. The ability to work 24/7 is a huge problem. Within that, the amount of task switching we do is very fatiguing. This is a level of mental gymnastics we haven't been conditioned to do as a species, and this is because technology has surpassed a human's ability to comprehend in a healthy way. We now live in a society where the stresses of work do not stay at work, and the technology we engage in during our free time creates that same stress and fatigue. In other words, so far as our nervous system is concerned, many of us are still working from the moment we wake up till the moment we fall asleep. So creatives, we need to reflect on what is within our control, and that most likely relates to how we engage with technology in our free time. So with that, let's look at what is within our control and how creativity can be used to enhance our well-being so that we can thrive. Creativity and creative health are significant contributors to our emotional processing and meaning making. Writing, drawing, or making music can help us process what we are feeling inside and make sense of our thoughts, providing emotional relief and freeing up brain space so that our minds aren't chattering in an overwhelming way. Creativity down-regulates your nervous system. Focus, rhythm, and slow breathing can activate the parasympathetic nervous system, reducing stress. Creatives. When you engage in skills slightly beyond the comfort of watching TV, this can foster a flow state, which is a deep absorption that is associated with improved well-being. See the psychologist whose name is on screen because I'm scared to butcher the name of a genius for further information. Most importantly, perhaps, do what you want. This can help you build a self-concept and have authorship over what you're doing. It is a way to bring control into your life. On top of all that, certain creative hobbies have an element of social connection, which can increase your belonging, which is great for our well-being. Creative health doesn't have to be a performance or seen as productivity. It is meaning-making to help you thrive. So, do you feel like you're more like Jane or John? Perhaps creativity can be the way to help you thrive. Micro-creativity is short, low-pressure creativity that helps improve attention and regulates emotions. Think 5 to 20 minutes a day. This can be sketching, journaling, creative writing, playing an instrument, taking photos, crafting, or doodling, etc. Simple stuff, not attached to any grander goal. The act itself is pure, on its own for enjoyment and nothing else. This is one way you can introduce very short but attentional creative expression into your day to improve your well-being and move towards thriving. Micro-creativity is characterized by tiny, consistent and enjoyable practices with no metric of success. Preferably using analog tools to reduce screen time due to the impacts of blue light. However, if you do wish to do your hobby on a screen, I suggest you implement some sort of blue blocker software or glasses. Also, pair it with something, whether that's coffee or just before bed, the start and the end of your day. Creatives, Languish is not a great place to be. I want to end this video by talking about signals to look out for to show that you are moving towards thriving and improving your well-being. If you are spontaneously protecting reflection time, you feel less hurried, you can focus on a single task for long periods of time, decisions feel motivating on their own rather than reactive, and you don't feel guilty about rest, these are all signs you are moving towards thriving. And bonus, if you are constantly looking forward to a particular activity, whether it be creativity or just hanging out with friends, that is also a very positive sign. So good luck, and as always, reach out if you have any questions. Like and subscribe and comment if you want to be part of a community bringing more creativity to the world. Tom. Mwah.